Right, it's time for question time. So I think you're going to take over here, Eddie, on that one.
Yes, thank you, Tim.
Brilliant. Okay, I'll leave question time with you then.
Oh, yes. So thank you everyone for your great questions that we've in the chat this morning. I've been looking over them and trying to put them in some sort of order and bundle them up. But I think today is I guess just the start, isn't it, today's session? So I don't think we'll be able to answer them all. So I think there's some points of clarification, detail, which whilst we've got Becky and also Andy here today, I think it's a great opportunity to ask those. But I think others are as much about, I guess, how we deliver biodiversity net gain in the Tees Valley between ourselves. So I think whilst Becky may have a view, I think some of those questions, I guess, are now starting the process of developing an action plan to deliver this locally. So if you are poised, Becky, I'll put the first one to you, which is around the National Register of Net Gain delivery sites. And the question is, will that be limited just to sites used for off-site compensation?
No, it's intended to cover both off-site and on-site. So there's a lot of work going on at the moment around exactly how that's going to work. And interestingly, there's some work going on, particularly with there's some digital sort of work going on at very early stage to get views, and Natural England are really trying to get local authorities involved in that to understand what the issues would be from your perspective. And I think they're, unsurprisingly, given resourcing pressures and that sort of thing, I think they're struggling a bit to engage, sort of to get as many local authorities as they'd like. But interestingly, earlier on this morning, I just had an email back around that register and sort of how it's going to work, and recognising that actually it's not going to be necessarily as simple as just having one site registered that links to a single planning application. They're thinking about, you know, how it might need to link to multiple planning applications and sort of planning permissions, and things like that. So they're obviously getting quite a lot of good feedback at an early stage around, you know, some of the issues that's going to face. But yeah, no, the idea is it will cover on and off site.
Great, thanks. So I guess is that a watch this space then? So there isn't
definitely
or email you can hand people onto at the minute. It's
yeah, what I'll do is while others are talking, I will dig out the contact actually for that team if you are interested in getting involved. Basically, it's sort of as much time as you've got really, but they're just interested to get that sort of testing really from an LPA perspective. But I'll try and dig out the contact details while we're talking. But what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, I can't remember now. Anyway, yeah, no, that's good.
Well, I might jog your memory because I guess the next one is related to sites, and I guess that provision, and it's about maintenance. And I know you touched on this today. Is there, I guess, anything more to add around, you know, I guess the long-term implications of maintenance of well, I guess either on-site or off-site provision?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to have to be agreed as part of the, you know, planning permission, planning application that's going to be set out, how it's going to be secured for 30 years. I mean, obviously, it's something that we face at the moment with any kind of mitigation or compensation, that it's not always great. And even if you get the right conditions or Section 106 agreements, it's partly the monitoring and enforcement of those in the long term. I guess, yes, the sort of responsibility sits with the developer, but they may pass that responsibility on to someone else. So, you know, whether that's a management company or, you know, if they're looking off-site delivery, it may be a land banking organisation. So exactly, you know, how that's obviously going to be another sort of aspect that the local authority will need to consider in terms of approving applications. And in itself, that's a, you know, resourcing and expertise issue. So I think, again, yeah, hopefully more. Oh, I know what I was going to say about the other question around the register is, yeah, hopefully we'll get a bit more of indication about both of those things when the DEFRA consultation comes out. At least, you know, it's obviously a consultation, so it's asking for feedback, but at least in terms of, you know, the direction that DEFRA see some of these things heading. And I guess, you know, what we're trying to do at PAS is, what we're hoping to do is run some events around that consultation to help you guys think about if you want to respond. You know, I don't know whether you'd respond at combined authority level or as individual local authorities, because obviously DEFRA want that feedback, but also so we can feedback some of that, some of the feelings from local authorities around some of these aspects back to DEFRA. So so I mean, I think we've got a fairly clear idea of how it should work, but exactly how to secure that and make sure it happens. I mean, my take on all of this though is, because I'm quite a glass half full type of person, is I don't think it's going to work perfectly in 2 years' time. But does that matter? Because at the moment we're in a situation where, unless a local authority is really sort of, really has been really well resourced on this and really pushed ahead of it, essentially we're looking at loss of biodiversity across the board. So, even if only a very small percentage of planning applications deliver the 10% net gain, that's still going to be a lot better than we are now. And I know perhaps that seems a bit negative, but I think it is just, it's moving us forward, and we will learn as we go along, and there will be issues and there will be problems and it won't be perfect, but I think we will get there over time. So that's my kind of perspective generally.
And I suppose on that glass half full theme, I know Tim was talking about some other authorities in the country who are trying to go beyond that 10%. And I know we chatted in the break, didn't we? I think one of the questions in the chat is about, if an LPA tries to go above 10%, will that be challenged on appeal? I guess, have you got any thoughts on how they would need to evidence that in their local policies?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that the feeling is that to counter any sort of challenges at development management stage, you would have to sort of do it as part of your assessment of your local plan. You just have to make sure that it's viable through that. So any kind of above 10%, and obviously it can be challenged at that stage. So I know that so Kent Local Nature Partnership are doing some work around this to get information around viability at 20%, and Swale, which is in Kent, has done some work around that for their local plan. I think the issue at the moment is that there is some pushback from the planning inspector around that, and the planning inspectorate, because it's not mandatory yet. So I guess it's just getting that evidence at the policy level if you want to do something like that. And we don't have any, but we'll try and collate those as part of the example of where those policies have gone through and how they've got through successfully in terms of demonstrating there's evidence. I would think that if you can link it to some of your other wider policies, that can only help until it becomes mandatory. But I think the feeling is if you can get it through as the plan being sound, then it's going to be more difficult for a developer to challenge. Obviously, in terms of 10%, because we have been asked about viability challenges for 10%, once it becomes mandatory, basically you've just got to do it, whether it creates viability issues or not. So in the short term, that obviously could create an issue, but in the longer term, once it becomes required legally, that issue will go away in the sense of the challenge, but won't go away in terms of the issues for the developer, I guess, in terms of actual on-site delivery. So
it'll be interesting to see where in the development chain that extra cost is swallowed. Thanks, Becky. I might give you a chance to have a breather actually and come to another one of the questions, which is more aimed locally, although you might have a view. But I think it touches on your last slide, Andy. I think someone was asking whether BNG on site can also be used almost as a remediation tool in terms of cleaning up land. And I think the answer is yes, isn't it?
Yeah, there are a few restrictions on when it can't be used, primarily to do with kind of national designations. But yeah, there's no reason why it couldn't be used to remediate land.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all need to kind of walk before we run, don't we? But I think that the exciting things about net gain is using natural capital accounting. Sorry, I'm dropping a lot of jargon, But you know, the other things that nature can provide for you that you touched on your last slide, didn't you? And also the natural capital account that Rachel and Geraldine shared showed that, for example, carbon sequestration, there's huge opportunities for that, isn't there? I guess it's just in terms of those habitat providers, it's if you're getting income for net gain, can you at the same time or instead, you know, be getting income for that carbon sequestration? And some of these more innovative income sources for nature are further down the line, aren't they? I think net gain's the most immediate one that we're dealing with. I'm getting nods from our speakers. Yeah, thanks, Sandy. And I think enforcement actually would be a good one to focus on as well. And I don't know whether that's you or Becky, Andy. Just questions about exactly how the enforcement mechanisms will work for biodiversity net gain. You know, is it through the town and country planning system, or is there extra levers in the Environment Bill? Again, either way, will extra funding come to those doing the enforcement? Do we know that yet?
I don't know if Andy knows more than me, but I would say, as far as I understand it, it will be through the sort of normal net mechanisms. I don't think there's going to be anything extra. I would very much hope that it's covered by the new burdens funding, because I think it will be a big gap if that hasn't been picked up, because that's going to be really key. Yeah, I think again, it's as much as we sort of know at the moment, but yeah, I think, you know, the sort of enforcement and monitoring side is going to be really, really key in terms of this actually delivering in the long term. So yeah, I don't know if Andy, if you've got any more insight.
No, not really, no. Similar thoughts really, that as the permissions will be Town and Country Planning Act, then I guess the enforcement will be via the same mechanism.
Yeah, there was something about the role of the planning inspectorate, but that was more around, I think, challenges on the register and things, and possibly them having a role there. But I don't think I suspect again we'll hopefully get more detail of that in the DEFRA consultation, what the current thinking is.
Yeah, no, thanks. Well, hopefully that's answered that question. I suppose down the line there'll be maybe practical training issues, won't there? Whereas, you know, currently trained enforcement officer might be able to spot a conservatory in or out of permission, but will they know exactly whether a long-term managed biodiversity site is proceeding in line with its management or not? I mean,
it's an existing issue as well, isn't it? I know, having worked in, you know, planning for years now, you know, it's always been an issue. And I know as when I worked for Natural England, we used to get consulted and asked to check on sort of, you know, monitoring, which we couldn't resource either. So I think it's a sort of ongoing issue, is that expertise in terms of enforcement and monitoring is often not there. So yeah.
Yeah. How are we doing for time, Chair?
We're probably okay for another 10-15 minutes, so a few more questions if we have
okay.
to. Yeah.
I suppose maybe going on to kind of the more philosophical ones, easy for me to say, and it's maybe more for us as an area, as much as yourself, Becky. I guess it's that risk which we've heard a few times. I know in our session about maybe offsetting and the unintended consequences of off-site provision, and maybe, you know, Tees Valley, is there a risk it would lose out to? I mean, I think the Lake District is mentioned in one question, but I don't assume there's a particular beef with the Lake District. I think it's more just other areas. Will other areas who have maybe invested and geared up for this, will they be able to move quicker and maybe get that gain at the expense of the Tees Valley?
I guess I didn't want to terrify everyone with that national credit thing. But for me, it's quite a good incentive to think about how you're going to manage this locally. It's something that even the local authorities that are quite far ahead with this, often they're only just thinking about, and actually they haven't necessarily had as much demand for off-site delivery as you know, you might think. So but I think it's definitely something that, you know, I know in our discussion group we talked about potential for that to be, you know, done at a sort of strategic level, and I think, you know, in conjunction with the LNRS, I think it is going to be, I guess I wanted to give you a bit of incentive to think about it locally rather than terrifying you. I mean, hopefully if the National Credit Scheme is set up properly, it won't end up that, you know, if you it's basically there as a backstop, so that, you know, it's something that MHCLG wanted when the you know, this was first discussed, because they were concerned that it could hold up development, obviously from their perspective. So I think it's there because if there is just no availability, and particularly it's the feeling is in the short term, that it may take a while before this, you know, the market gets going and that sort of thing. So it's there as a backstop. So I wouldn't, you know, I think if you've got a good setup, you know, hopefully that'll be much easier for the developers to use, and they'll sort of default to that rather than this national credit scheme. So I guess it's yeah, and then that's you know, as you said, Eddie, it's, you know, that's something for you to think about, you know, how do you do that, and how do you make that happen. I guess I just wanted to, you know, it was less to sort of terrify you that, oh god, all your money's going to go to the Lake District or something. It was more like, you know, actually there's a real incentive to start thinking about this now, because I think there is a, you know, there's a feeling often that, well, actually it's not coming in for 2 years, we don't really need to worry about it. But some of, particularly this side of things, probably you do need to not worry about it necessarily, but start thinking about it a little bit earlier. And it's a kind of, it's pretty much a sort of you know, it's not going to be something that you could, you know, it's a bit of a no-brainer really in the terms of it's likely to be needed. So if that makes sense. So yeah.
Can I just jump in there?
Yeah, go on, Andy.
I think there's kind of a PR side of things as well from a developer's perspective with delivering things locally as opposed to at the other end of the country, because it's easier to make that kind of argument to say, well, we are siting here and we're investing in environmental enhancements here, rather than saying we're sticking money in a pot that might end up in Cornwall. It's not going to go down and with the kind of the local community that well to say that. So there's that kind of argument for it as well, and it's something that thinking is starting to take place in some regards in Tees Valley, particularly in relation to the Development Corporation, who are already starting to look across the wider estuary in terms of what the opportunities are to kind of future-proof their own kind of regeneration plan. So I think there's early thinking going on, and yeah, it to kind of reinforce what Becky said there, then yeah, absolutely, it's something that needs to be thought about some more.
Thanks, Andy. Any reflections from the Nature Partnership?
I'm just wondering whether the converse is true as well, though, that if we have our kind of ducks in line, that we could be the recipient of significant funding to actually undertake stuff we want to do. So the other side of it is that on one level, yeah, our money could run off somewhere else, but equally we could be the recipient of somebody else's, and that is a possibility if we had some strategic projects that, you know, it's a bit like creating this sort of market, isn't it, really, in that sense, that we could actually benefit from multiple stack benefits if we get it right, and as long as it all works out that way, that actually we'd be creating fantastic places for nature in the Tees Valley, of which, you know, if you look at our agricultural you know, sector, there's a shed load of emissions coming off that on stuff that might be, well, I'm not going to, it'd be a terrible thing to say flogging a dead horse in an agricultural sense, but you know, in terms of it might not be the best, you know, putting a lot of effort into farming land that might be better off doing something else, that's all. And actually it's blending all those things together potentially. I'm just going to throw that one out there. I'm not saying I've got, that is the answer or could be, but I don't know, how do we feel about that?
You go. Laid a challenge there. Does the Tees Valley want to, as economists call, first user advantage, first mover advantage? Get in there first. Thanks everyone for your questions in the chat. I think hopefully I've kind of represented them all. I guess just before I hand back to Tim, I think there was questions, but also maybe some answers in the chat as well. I mean, what I took from that is suggestions that, you know, can we work together on, you know, common validation checklist for B&G across the Tees Valley, just make life easier. Just comments, I think both in the chat, but also certainly in my session about, can Tees Valley aggregate resource, both because it strategically makes sense, but I guess just that tactical response to challenges that all parties are facing in terms of funding. So already people are starting to think about answers. So I think it'd be great after this session if we can, kind of keep moving and keep maintaining that momentum. But thanks, Andy, and thanks, Becky.
Lovely, and thank you, Eddie, and thank you to all our panellists. So yes, it's kind of it's time to maybe start thinking about winding the workshop down. It's felt like a mini conference rather than a workshop, actually, to be fair. So we've covered a lot of ground today. Just some reflections, I think, from what's been said, and certainly if we've got a few minutes and somebody wants to pitch in on top of that. But it seems to me there's a real opportunity at a local level for that, that transactional stuff, the kind of, we've got an application and what we're going to do with it sort of thing, and the need for ecology advice to support that, I think was really came through very clear. But there is a strategic picture here, and I think it's between those two poles, I think is where the opportunities might lie. I think that if we start thinking about some of the tactical interventions right now in terms of validation checklists and everything else, we can start to get wound up to the point where we can actually really start to think about this, not just with the lever of biodiversity net gain, but just in terms of actually getting better quality applications. And I think, there's sometimes just some stuff there that it's just going on anyway, and whether you've got a number or not, broadly speaking, there is some stuff out there that would mean that you could start to lever in, improvements for nature and everything else. So I think there was that. I think there's a real potential interface with different funding streams and everything else, and aligning all that together to create, on one level, a bit of a market really for this stuff, and actually the Tees Valley being set up to kind of do that really. And I think that differential across potentially different authority areas is potentially a strength, because you have different contexts. Some are very urban, some are quite rural. Between that local and strategic, I think there's potentially something there that's quite nuanced, and again, kind of a bit more of a sort of front runner really. And I think hopefully, I think what everybody will see today is that there's a lot of stuff going on out there already that we've already been doing that puts us in a good position to move on to the next stage. And actually, I think for those of us who perhaps thought this was a long way away, certainly the bus isn't just on the horizon, you can now hear its engine. So, this is coming at us, and we do need to kind of, be ready to get on it really, and be there. And I'm obviously ambitious for the Tees Valley that, with our kind of combined partnership working, that we can probably punch above our weight really, versus places that probably don't have some of our viability problems and economic challenges. So, if we can pick those things up and turn those into a virtue, I think we're laughing tea cakes. So I hope that's sort of, I hope that's sort of been a fair sort of roundup really of what we've kind of come up against. I think as a sub-region, we've been very privileged to have had the input today from Becky, from Paz. Thanks very much. And I would say thank you as an ongoing thank you to all our partners and our friends from DEFRA, who are constantly keeping this whole thing rolling with us and for us. Thanks to everybody who came today. Really pleased you could be here. And as far as I'm concerned, what an awesome morning. With 4 minutes to go, I think, unless anybody's got some burning comment, which you're very welcome to throw in right now, thank you very much.